Hey everybody, welcome in that new Golem tutorial where we'll see how to use render layers in combination with Golem solution caches. So here I'm using my 2020 Golem 826. I exported a simulation and I'm going to use V-Ray. So there's going to be some specifics about the V-Ray implementation, which will not be the same within Arnold and RenderMan or Redshift. But the rest will be more or less the same, so stick to the video anyway. But if you're using the V-Ray, there's going to be some slight differences that I'm going to highlight into that video here. So if we render that scene within that master layer, we are expecting to see the geometry, the characters, and the shading. So this is all working properly. So let's say now that we will have to create a new render layer and we'll just have to maybe just have that plane and the crowd on it. So what I'll do is I'm going to create a collection. And within that collection, I'm just going to add that plane geometry that I have. Great. So here, and I'm going to turn on that render layer. We can see that the sphere and the cube disappeared, as well as the Golem simulation, which is expected so far. Let's refresh that render. You can probably click on that one, right? Okay. If I do this, now I get my plane and none of my crowd characters. In some situation, this is not happening here. We end up with some errors regarding the shading, like the default shader not being found. I'm not having it here. Probably if I press render a couple of times, I may have it. So this is because even if you're using render layers by default when using V-Ray, and that's only when using V-Ray, the Golem characters will be triggered and processed, so you'll have some override at render time, which will provide some more rendering processes. So this is only happening with V-Ray, and this is something that we need to take care about specifically. So let's say we'd like to include the crowd. The node which handles the crowd is called the render proxy. It's embedded into the simulation cache proxy. So the cache proxy is the node which displays the characters in the scene. The render proxy, which is here, is the node which takes care of rendering the characters in the scene. So if I had that specific node to my render layer, we can see the characters appear here. And if I press rendered, now I'll get my characters being rendered, but not shaded. So we're going to speak about this. So as I said earlier, even if that node is not included when using V-Ray, the geometry is processed. If you want to avoid that process to happen, you may notice that the render proxy node has an enable button, which is by default connected to the cache proxy enable button here, enable here. So if I uncheck this here, disable, so now it tells that within that render layer, the character will not be rendered anymore. So if I press render, I can see the characters disappear and no render message. So it means that within your render layer, if you don't want Golem to appear, and this is once again only something that you want to do if you're using V-Ray, you can create an attribute override, and within that attribute override in your render layer, you can just disable your crowd, and the next time you're going to render, you'll be fine. But in our situation, we'd like that crowd to be rendered. So I'm going to enable it back, and we'll try to fix that shader issue that we have in here. Okay. So what about shaders? So the shaders, they are included into a GLM shader group. So we'd like to include this into our render layer if we want this to be taken into account properly. So we'll have the shaders. We can see that the T-pose character holding the shaders will be here, but don't be afraid, because the primary visibility of that geometry is going to be turned off. But the geo needs to exist and needs to be attached to that render layer for the shaders to be accessible by the crowds, and this is how your characters get shaded at the end. And now we can see that our characters are shaded properly in the right render layer, and we're going to wait for this to end up. And if we go back into a master render layer and press render, we'll have the geometry coming back as well. Here we go. So hope that makes sense, and see you into the next video.